Orange, we were tasked with understanding the relationship between mortals and fate and immortal forces, and how they kind of played in the Aeneid. So my passage was specifically lines 424 to 561, where Venus has disguised herself as a huntress and is talking to Aeneas and trying to convince him to go to Carthage and get help from the queen. And something I found especially interesting in this was that there wasn't any specific divine intervention. She didn't use any of her powers to will him anyway. She just transformed herself and went and talked to him and tried to reason with him, which is interesting when it comes to one-on-one conversation, one-on-one influence. They choose to be more personal and they choose to not use their powers, but when it comes to bigger issues of war, they tend to use stronger forces in order to influence what's happening.
My passage was in book 2. It was when Aeneas' father, was it Anchises? Anchises reads Zeus's omens, or Jupiter's omens. The first one being the fire above Aeolus, Aeolus' head. And then the second, after he sees that, he says, "Omnipotent Jupiter, if prayers affect you, look down upon us. That's all I ask." And then, the star falls out of the sky. And that was lines 898 and 899. And I connected that to the Iliad when Priam goes to Achilles' camp to retrieve Hector's body, and he's accompanied by Hermes. And the point I made out of that is that, Aeneas is to make Rome, and Priam, before his city's demise, is to retrieve his son's body, and the gods will it, to be so. And so I just said that basically gods want to protect their best interests, and they'll do that indirectly or directly. I don't really see a correlation of when it's direct or indirect, but either way, I still do that.
So my passage was between lines 347 and 354, when Venus comes to Jupiter and is basically asking about Aeneas and, is he okay? And Jupiter gives this response that's basically, "Oh yeah, I'll allow him to make it to Italy. I'll let him go there." It's kind of it's almost like he's saying, out of the gracefulness of my heart, I'll let him go. So just kind of just reminded me of how in the Iliad we constantly saw the gods kind of treated humans not necessarily as playthings, but gods had their certain people that they always pushed forward to do well, and we kind of see that again with Jupiter and Aeneas saying, with Jupiter saying that I'm in control and I can kind of control what happens.
Brittany or Eliza, did you want to say anything?
Okay. I did, my passage was book 2, 775 through 812. So when Aeneas is in Troy as it's falling and sees Helen and is going to kill her, just so he can feel better about things. And his mother shows up and tells him not to kill her because she's not to blame for everything that's happening, because the gods willed it. Or it's the harsh will of the gods is the direct quote. So there's nothing that she could have done differently. So I compared that to Gilgamesh, because they go to the gods, specifically their mother goddess, in both texts for help or advice. But the gods as a council still decide certain events. So in the Trojan War or in Gilgamesh, to kill Enkidu, or help them to kill Humbaba.
Sure. The passage I chose is the section in which Venus decides to send her son to make, is it
Dido.
Dido.
It's actually Dido.
Dido.
But it's a long I in the Latin, which would be Dido. But we have a long I in English, and so people mostly say Dido. You can do either one. Dido is more familiar. People recognize it by Dido.
So the section where Dido is forced to fall in love with Aeneas, because in that section it sort of it shows that the gods can not only like manipulate external forces, they can also manipulate a person's like mind and feelings and actions. And I connected this to the Stoics' belief because it's sort of the opposite. Whereas in the dream of Scipio, it says you have a god's power to rule and govern and direct the body that is your servant. Whereas in the Aeneid, not even your body is under your own control. Like gods can affect that.
Okay, now we're gonna move on to group Grace.
So for our prompt, we needed to find the role of dreams, omens, and prophecy in the books of the Aeneid, and then from those, relate them back to what we've read previously in the last semester. So for my example, it's book 1, lines 345 to 390, when Venus appears to Jupiter to ask about her son, to ask when will his trouble subside, and ask what does his future hold. And Jupiter goes on and on about the success that Venus' son, that Aeneas will have, saying that your son will fight a fierce war, beat down fierce armies, and establish city walls, basically building a new Troy, building a new lavish city for all of his people. And I related this back to the Iliad when Achilles' mother appeared to him and basically told him, do you want to live a short life and be remembered forever, or do you want to live a happy life and nobody knows who you are? So the reason I related it back to this is because obviously Achilles chose the short life and chose that greatness, and Jupiter is basically showing the same greatness that Achilles achieved for Aeneas.
I got a lot by omens.
Great. Go get it. It's in the bookstore. We haven't been able to read it, so I used the audio book.
I got a lot of omens like from animals and stuff. In the Iliad, book 8, line 247, Agamemnon like praises Zeus, and so Zeus like sends out an eagle like whipping a pond, and it says there that the eagle is like the surest winged birds, and right away the Greeks like got excited and started fighting more vigorously. And in the Aeneid, book 2, line 280 to line 310, like two snakes came from the sea and killed Laocoon and his sons, and people started to interpret it as like because Laocoon like disrespected Athena by hurling a spear at the Moors. So I feel like the omens are like based on animals, seem like the highest and most surest like omens out there. So they're usually sent down by gods, and so maybe that's why like people like react like frantically to such moments.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay, Connor.
Okay.
See, you found it.
Yeah.
Okay. So I talked about kind of what Gray did with where Venus goes to Zeus or Jupiter, and kind of asks about the destiny of the Trojan people, and like on 366 to 367, he says 3 full centuries the kingdom will be ruled by Hector's race, and then later on, where's this one? Whatever. Anyway, later on he says that they will build their own city, and this just reminded me of kind of when Yahweh promised to Moses about the future of the Israelites, as like the Aeneid is very similar to kind of like the Jewish origin story.
Yeah, I'm not really sure how my two relate, but in the Epic of Gilgamesh, there's a meteor that his mother tells him was it's a companion, it's his future companion, his future friend. And then in the Aeneid, a different book than everyone, but lines 8-15. Book 2, there's another meteor that Aeneas' father uses as the sign to flee Troy. Not entirely sure what the significance of a meteor is, but it was kind of interesting that they're both in both.
Okay. Guess I'll move on to commentary.
So that.
Do you want me to start?
Sure, if you want to.
Okay. I focused on family relationships, specifically mothers and fathers. So for the mother-child relationship, I went to book 2, line 774. This is when Aphrodite or Venus appears to Aeneas and advises him not to seek revenge, but to prioritize saving his family, right? So, never before so clear and a pure light, stepping before me, radiant through the night, my loving mother came. Down onto, her consoling him, will you not first revisit the place you left your father, and so on. And so we see the role of a mother as someone who provides mentorship and advice, and that made me think of Epic of Gilgamesh, with Gilgamesh and his mother Ninsun, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then Achilles and his mother Thetis, both of which are goddesses and both of which are pretty much available to their sons at any time for suggestions and advice. And in all of these situations, the father is either absent or significantly less involved in their actions, which I think shows that these societies sort of view women and mothers as the predominant caretaker, in the sense that they're the ones who are supposed to be more directly involved in their children's lives, while the father does whatever, I guess. And speaking of fathers, book 2, line 857, we see Aeneas trying to convince his father to flee the city. And this is a point that you made last class, Kenny, where the paterfamilias, is that correct? This idea that what a father says typically goes, and this is a pretty good example of how important it is to have a father's approval to do anything, even if it's fleeing a city for your life. I think that's common for a lot of these patriarchal societies. But for contrast, I thought of Genesis chapter 3, where not a father in the same sense, but the Lord commanded that they not eat from the forbidden tree, right? But they did it anyways, and that had dire consequences for them. So, yeah. Jake, you had another family point?
Yeah, I had a family point too in book 2. In line 920 through like 980. Here Aeneas saves his family from death. Even though he saves his family from death from the attack on Troy. So here I see how much he cares for his family. And through him saving his family, his wife gets lost. So the fact that he went back to the danger to go look for his wife, even though her fate was in Troy, shows to you how much family means to him, and how much the relationship is and stuff. And I related this to Exodus in the Bible, the way that Moses led his people out of from the destruction of the Pharaoh. So I felt like those two was closely related. And you see how much, family is to them.
Okay. Relationship that I found was friend relationship. And it's found on page 36. And it's like lines 117 through 130. So in this line, it talks about the companions dying. So it says, being kin to him, in my first years I joined him as a companion. And then down below it says, raging for my blameless friend's downfall. And the blameless prince's downfall made me think of the Epic of Gilgamesh, because Gilgamesh was very hurt by Enkidu's death, and Enkidu didn't even do anything. He was just there to help make Gilgamesh a better being. But he still had to die anyway. And then down below it says, again to Argos I'd avenge him there, and I roused hatred with my talk. I fell afoul now of that man. And so this part of the passage is more similar to Achilles and Patroclus, because Achilles ended up avenging the death of Patroclus because he had such strong friendship ties to them. But then I was looking back through my colloquium notes, and something that's similar between both of those relationships that I tied back to is when we were reading the Nicomachean Ethics, we defined different types of friendships, and both Enkidu and Gilgamesh and Patroclus and Achilles were perfect friendships. So that's based on the Nicomachean Ethics notes that I had from class.
Yeah, I noted the same passage as Roma, and I also related it to Achilles and Patroclus, where it talked about how he'd avenge him and how he could not rest until he had served his turn, because Achilles didn't rest until Hector was punished, and even after he killed him, he dragged him through the town in books 24. And it just shows how the Romans and the Greeks viewed friendship similarly, because they went through similar actions. Okay.
What passage was that? What is that?
The passage in here, it was book 2, lines
I started
115 through 135 for me.
Yeah, I had 115 through 130.
So, okay, so this is the dialogue of Sinon, right? Okay, the Greek, right? Okay. And this is not true. None of this is true.
I did not pick up on that, but that's because I was really looking for the relationship that wasn't like God family relationship, and
Right.
people being used as pawns like they were in the Iliad. So that's why I saw friendship. I can tie it.
Oops.
Yeah, I just did not realize that so often.
So we all know what's going on here, right? This is Aeneas is now in book 2. He's recounting how the fall of Troy, essentially. In the next book, in book 3, he's going to recount his journeys that have led him to land there on the northern coast of Africa. And so in this particular, he's talking about the fall of Troy, and this concerns the Trojan horse, what to do with it, right? The Greeks apparently have gone, and they've left behind the Trojan horse, and then this person, Sinon, he is there, presumably, according to his story to the Trojans, he is there to be a sacrifice in the same way that Iphigenia was a sacrifice to enable the Greeks to sail to Troy. Sinon is going to be the sacrifice that will enable them to sail safely home. And he has been left there as a sacrifice. That they ended up not killing him is because he kind of escaped and got away before they departed, but that he's there, and it's his job is to convince the Trojans that this is an offering to Athena, okay, that this is not some ruse, okay. And in order to do this, he tells this story of his life, okay, and how the Greeks have betrayed him, and therefore he feels completely justified and comfortable in confiding in them this plot of what the Greeks are doing. Right? Okay, So this is his presentation to the Trojans in order to convince them that this is an offering to Athena, and therefore it's sacred, and that they shouldn't destroy it, or they shouldn't be mistrustful of it. That the Greeks have gone back to Argos in order to consult with the gods to see what they need to do now, having essentially in one of the missions where Diomedes and Odysseus have desecrated the temple of Athena and taken away the Palladium, which was this image of Athena. And as a consequence of that, the Greeks are not going to be allowed to sack Troy until they make proper sort of things. So this is all an act on the part of Cimon. Is that it? Is that all the groups? Okay. So I want us to go back with Kylie's permission. I want us to go back, and I want to explore further the issue that Tim brought up about what constitutes divine influence, indirect or direct. What would you say constitutes direct influence as opposed to indirect influence? And this also applies to Dan H's comment about the animals, the use of animals. Okay, so we have a whole variety of supernatural experiences so far, just in these first two books. How would we categorize them? What are we looking at here? We have dreams, right? Okay, what are the dreams? Hector appears in a dream. Okay. Dido's dead husband appears, Zacchaeus, right? Absolutely. Okay, so we've got these dreams, people who appear to them in dreams, right? And give them information, relevant information. Hector, of course, information about the fall of Troy and the safety of the so-called Penates. These are the household gods, if you will, of Troy. Okay, so we've got dreams. What else? How does that compare to the dreams that we've seen before?
It's similar.
Right? Okay, can you think of examples?
Someone else?
There's the dream that Agamemnon has at the beginning of the Iliad, that the gods send to him so that he'll make certain strategic decisions.
Right. And we also, of course, the most important is the dream or the appearance of Patroclus, right, to Achilles. Okay, that precipitates the last set of events in the Iliad. So we have dreams, right? Is that direct or indirect?
Direct? No, it's indirect, right?
Because it's their interpretation.
You guys, you have to,
It's
decide.
it's pretty indirect if it's not face to face.
All right, we had some other experiences here, right? We have Venus, right, appears to Aeneas in two different ways, right? During the fall of Troy, she appears to him as Venus, right? But also in Carthage, in northern Africa, she appears to him as a huntress, right? She's out there. Okay, so we have this, and those of you who have seen the Odyssey know that this is in parallel to what happens with Athena when Odysseus encounters him as he arrives home in Ithaca. Exactly parallel. I want to underscore, and Professor Sattersfield will probably underscore this as well, that what we are dealing with here is a highly literary composition, as opposed to the Homeric poems that were artifacts of an oral tradition. Whereas the bards and the singers that created the Iliad and the Odyssey in performance, Virgil took 10 years to compose the Aeneid, which works out to about 3 lines a day. right? And this is a highly literary work. What Virgil did in terms of the language itself, sort of bending Latin to the dactylic hexameter, to the meter of epic, is a great accomplishment. Okay, there were other poets that were doing similar things, Horace, Ovid, and other writers, but Virgil emulating the Greek epics and actually using the meter of Greek epic in order to compose this in a different language, right, is a significant poetic accomplishment. But it's a highly literary thing in the sense that that Virgil knew the Homeric poems and the epic cycle extremely well. And we know this because of all of these sort of allusions that he makes and the way that he constructs the first half of the Aeneid in very conscious emulation of the Odyssey, and the second half in very conscious emulation of the Iliad, right? So we have two halves of the Aeneid, and they fall into they track the Odyssey and the Iliad. Here's an example that shows, for just one teeny example that illustrates how closely or the ways in which Virgil very deliberately built this work around the Greek epics. There is in the Iliad, there is one time when the Homeric tradition uses the word for a top, a strombos, okay? And there is one time in the Aeneid when Virgil uses the word top, okay, that you're going to see. This is extremely conscious emulation of the Greek epics, okay? Not in other words, taking that as a model and actually demonstrating his mastery of the epic tradition, right? So this is a very deliberate poem, and you will see this again and again and again. Those of you, for example, who have read the Odyssey, who's read the Odyssey? You remember when Odysseus is when they are there on the island of Circe, right? Okay, he also goes hunting and gathering, right? What does he find? What does he get?
Molly?
Oh, that's when he goes to Circe. But he's out there and he shoots a deer, and he takes him back to his. Okay, how many deer does Aeneas shoot? 7. Okay, all right. So Aeneas, much better than Odysseus, right? Because he kills 7 of them, right? Imagine. I don't know if you've ever been deer hunting, right? But packing a deer out of the wild it's not an easy thing, right? Okay, so there's Aeneas figured. The games, the funeral, we're going to see the funeral games, for example, and you will see that Virgil builds on top of the funeral games, and whatever the Greeks could do, the Romans could do better. Okay. All of that's more magnified, better. Okay. So anyway, all of this to say that this will be particularly more pronounced when we get to the second half, is that we will be looking more closely back at the Iliad, and you should make it a point to bring your Iliads to class, because Virgil had the Iliad at his elbow, right, when he was composing these poems, right? He has them right there, okay? If he didn't know them by heart, then that's entirely possible as well. All right, so where are we on, so the dreams. So the dreams, we see the dream of Achilles, that Achilles has of Patroclus, and we have the dream of Hector that Aeneas has. What do they do at the end of these dreams? What does Aeneas try to do when Creusa appears to him? Tries to hug her, right? 3 times, right? Right out of the Iliad, right? Exactly emulating the Iliad. When Aeneas is in the ocean, right? And he's swamped by this storm, what does he say? Find it in there. What's that? Yes, exactly. What does Odysseus say when he's about to drown, just before he gets washed up on the island of Scheria? almost exactly the same thing. So bring your Homeric poems with you, because Virgil is going to refer back to them, is going to allude to them, is going to use them as the backdrop for the poem. All right, so I want to bring up a couple other things, but this notion, this typology characterizing the influence, where we see dreams of different nature. We have dreams, the divine influences coming through dreams, but dreams of divinities themselves, or dreams of people, right? We see direct encounters of divinities, right? Venus appears to Aeneas in person, but also in disguise. We have the gods assuming various guises from time to time, right? We have the gods sending animals, as Dan pointed out, that this is providing omens to the Greeks in different ways. We are going to have oracles and prophecies. We're going to have all of this entire set of ways in which, presumably, these supernatural forces make their will known to the Greeks. And you've just been reading about the Epicureans and the Stoics, right? What did the Stoics and the Epicureans think about this? The Epicureans would say what? There's no divine influence. You know, the gods, if they exist in a realm, and they're not going to be bothered by human beings. When there's a thunderbolt or a meteor or anything like that, that's a natural phenomenon. That's not some god, right? What would the Stoics say?
No, you seem to.
What?
That everything's already planned out. It's gonna happen.
Yeah, these natural phenomena are part of the big mechanism of the universe, right? Okay, so if lightning strikes or a meteor comes, that's because that's the mechanism of the universe. It's not Jupiter or any particular god. So where's Virgil coming from?
Really?
What's that? This is neither Epicurean nor Stoic, right? Although we see the way in which Aeneas responds to certain things seems to be Stoic, right? Okay, he just has to endure these various things. So we see things that are Stoic and Epicurean in some ways, but this whole system, the divine system that Virgil has created here, doesn't belong to either one of those philosophical schools, right? It draws on Pythagoreanism, okay, that we saw in Plato. It draws heavily on the Greek system and the Roman system of this very sort of pantheistic or polytheistic system that the Greeks had. The Romans imported that. They've embraced it, so we've got temples and things, but it's also been strongly influenced by the Etruscans in terms of the design of their temples, in terms of the interpretation of omens. Is very much Etruscan, which is a different cultural background. They also have penates. They've got noumena, which are sort of supernatural forces that inhabit places like streams and pastures and places. Seneca talks about the sort of noumena that animate the world out there, that in some way are representative or give us a sense of the divine influences of the cosmos. So this is a very eclectic vision of what the human condition is all about. Okay. A couple last things about this. One is that you see, we're talking about paterfamilias, and we also see this concept of pietas, right? Pietas, piety. Pietas means filial devotion, right? It means a devotion to one's ancestors, right? And this animates this thing. The fact that Aeneas takes his dad with him on his shoulders, right, is a function of pietas, of piety. In fact, Aeneas is frequently referred to as pious Aeneas. That is a person that is fully conscious of where of where they stand in their ancestry, fully conscious of the people that came before them and fully conscious of their responsibility to those that come after. This is a very, very important aspect of Roman culture, right? It's so important. So, for example, when people died, okay, they would have a death mask made, and this death mask would be displayed in a little alcove in the house, okay? So the masks of the ancestors, and they would take these out at a particular point for ritual purposes and parade them to actually kind of bring and conjure, if you will, their ancestors with them. So extremely conscious of their ancestry and of their families, okay? And that's in this concept of piety, of piety. The other thing is that you will see that the Greeks are depicted as nothing but a society of actors. You can never trust a Greek, okay? They are actors, okay? Just like Sinon, all of them, they're actors. They're never straightforward. They're never honest with you. They are always conniving, manipulative. They're all actors, okay? They can all play multiple roles, okay? As opposed to the Romans. Romans are straightforward, you know, what you see is what you get kind of person. Complete honesty, transparency, truthfulness. The Greeks, oh, a wily bunch, right? Okay, you can never take the Greeks at their word, right? They're always conniving, and we're going to see this again and again and again in this thing as Virgil differentiates, although using these models, the Greek epics as his model, he's going to differentiate Roman culture through a comparison with what the Greeks do at various points. Okay, so we're going to go through the entire Iliad and the Odyssey again, but this time with Roman participants who are going to be different than their Greek counterparts. Did I say anything about love?
No.
Oh my gosh, it's about to come. Okay. For our next reading assignments, book 3 and 4, this is especially Greek, the fourth book is about this fierce relationship between Dido and Aeneas, which is going to lead in time to the Punic Wars, okay? So this is a love, we've seen a love affair, okay? The affair between Menelaus and Helen, and Paris and Helen. This relationship also is going to lead to wars. I'll see you.
Stop doing that.
It's a bad habit.
Good work, team.